Okay, we are back again with one of our most beloved segments, Unearthing Cincinnati's Past with Greg Hand. Greg Hand, thank you for coming on again.
Always a pleasure.
Yes, sir. What do you have for us this week?
Let's talk about death again.
Let's talk about death.
Let's talk about lots of death. You know, the 1919 international flu pandemic was something that Cincinnati could not escape. So back in 1918, beginning of 1919, Cincinnati was knee deep in influenza. Now this was called, after many years of research, scientists discovered that the name that it was given at the time, 1918, was incorrect. It was known then as the Spanish flu.
Okay.
Or the Spanish grip. And it turned out that it was named that simply because that was where the first government that started keeping track of it was the Spanish government. Spain was kind of out of the action from World War I. World War I was still going on when this influenza started coming out, and so they had the ability to take public health measures. And because they stepped up and were at the leading edge, they got tarred with the name. The irony is that the disease probably came from pig farms in the Midwest of the United States. And what were we doing with pig farms in the Midwest in the United States in 1918? We were drafting the pig farmers and putting them in the army and sending them to Europe. And so apparently a lot of these soldiers from the United States carried this influenza from the pigs to Europe and started bringing it back, because also in 1918 the war was winding down, and soldiers were starting to come home. And so it was a recipe made for disaster, for spreading this disease around.
So it started in the United States in pig farms. We sent it over into Europe and we named it the Spanish flu, blamed them, and then spread it around there, and then brought everyone back to spread it throughout the rest of
this propaganda sort of thing, like calling COVID the Chinese virus and all that. This is not new. I mean, this is the modus operandi for the United States, is find somebody else to take the fall for it.
Yeah, it couldn't have been us. It couldn't have been here in the United States.
And the Cincinnati was a way station for a lot of these soldiers coming and going, because Camp Sheridan, which was Camp Sherman, which was located at Chillicothe, Ohio, was one of the primary training camps for sending people overseas and for bringing them back into the United States and repatriating them. So a lot of traffic was going through Chillicothe, and of course, all the rail lines going to Chillicothe would have gone through Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And so Cincinnati was kind of in the bullseye on this sort of thing. And so in October 1918, after a couple of months of suggesting that there's this disease out on the East Coast, the health department in the city of Cincinnati decided we've got to do something about this. And so they issued a ban on public gatherings. And so the lockdowns that we've been hearing about, the shelter in place, that sort of thing, this is what they did in 1918. They shut down all churches. They shut down all schools. They shut down theaters, including motion picture theaters. And they had to specify that because at the time, motion pictures were so new that people didn't think of motion picture theaters as theaters.
Interesting.
and public meeting places.
Okay, so yeah, a century ago, it's the exact same thing that we're dealing with now. Similarities from lockdown and staying these
Exactly.
businesses all shut down. Wow.
With one very noticeable exception. They did not close saloons. They did not close saloons because they could not close restaurants. It was impossible to close restaurants. And they determined that they could not tell the difference in law between a saloon and a restaurant. And so saloons got to stay open. Now, why, you might ask, would they leave saloons open? And that was, lots of people had their meals there.
Okay.
So saloons in 1918 were not just drinking establishments. The idea of the free lunch, that sort of thing, every saloon worth its reputation and its clientele had a kitchen in the back. And so there were lots of people who took dinner at the saloon, just as they took dinner or lunch in a restaurant. And the reason for this is, if you look at the living accommodations for people in 1918 in Cincinnati, if you owned your own house, it was almost a given that you had a household staff. You would have at least had a maid.
Yeah.
Probably a maid and a cook. If you had children, you had a maid and a cook and a nanny. And your kitchen was a place where you, as a homeowner, almost never went. You just showed up in the dining room at 6 p.m. and the cook brings the food out.
You better be ready. Yeah.
Right. But for those people who did not own their own house, all they had was a room. I mean, literally a room. Almost none of the apartments in Cincinnati had indoor plumbing. So an apartment house in 1918 would have been a lot of rooms. And then out in the backyard, there would have been a row of outhouses over a privy vault. And that was, so the room was a place basically that you slept. You know, your room in an apartment building would probably have a bed, maybe a table or desk or some place where you could sit and write or something like that. But it was not a place that you stayed other than sleeping. If you were going to socialize, you went out. If you were going to eat, you went out. If you had any food in the room, it would have been very minimal, bread, cheese, something like that.
No DoorDash back then. So
yeah, no DoorDash, no grub,
Yeah.
And so as a consequence, they had to leave the saloons open. Okay, now remember, this is prior to the final vote on national prohibition.
Okay.
So the effort to enforce national prohibition was working its way through the system in 1918, but it hadn't come to that final vote. That final vote would have taken place in January of 1919.
Okay, so right there.
And then the way the amendment was written 1 year later, which would have been January of 1920, that's when prohibition took effect. Okay, who was pushing national prohibition? Who was the strongest force for national prohibition? Ministers.
Yeah.
And what did the city of Cincinnati do? They closed the churches and left the saloons open. And the religious community in Cincinnati went through the roof.
Yeah, probably did not like that.
There were there were clerical heads exploding all over the city. Letters to the editor are unbelievable.
Wow.
Their animosity toward this decision by the city. And so eventually the city had to modify the rules on saloons. And what they did was they said, the saloons can stay open, they can serve food, but they can only serve beverages in bottles, and it has to be taken off premises. So you can't go into the saloon and put your foot up on the rail and have a cold one at the bar. You had to take that home.
Wow, some of those similarities between a century ago and now with the pandemic happening, it's absurd how similar some of these things are.
Now, there was another conflict with one of these prohibitions, and that was the issue about sporting events.
Yep.
Because the big sporting events in October, November, December in Cincinnati would have been football, and we didn't have a professional team at the time. So professional football would have been the local colleges, Xavier, UC, that sort of thing. That would have been your big local sporting event.
Yeah, I forgot that Xavier used to have a football team.
Indeed. So the people who complained about the ban on sporting events were the military.
Okay.
Because the University of Cincinnati was turned into basically an officer training camp. There were barracks all over the campus. Most of the people enrolled at the university would have been soldiers training to become officers.
Yeah.
And the training personnel, the captains and the majors who were overseeing the training, really looked at football as a necessary adjunct to officer training. It taught leadership, it taught planning, it taught strategy, that sort of thing. And so the military was asking the city, let's let a little air in here. Let us play some games because you're hurting our training. And by gosh, we're going to go out there and fight the Hun. And so we need to be ready. And so early in the process, Denison University was scheduled to play UC.
Okay.
And Denison contacted the university and said, it's nice and healthy out here in the country, but down there in the city, we're not sure what y'all are doing. And so we're just going to stay here and we're going to skip that game. And again, back and forth.
Yeah, opting out.
Yes, the folks at Denison were roasted by the people in Cincinnati. They're probably German sympathizers.
Oh, we went full personal with it.
Oh yeah, we went there.
We were ignoring the pandemic and just went, "Why? What is an absurd reason why they wouldn't play us?"
Indeed. So, as a consequence, the University of Cincinnati they were not yet the Bearcats, but the University of Cincinnati only played 5 games. That season. They did
similar to the Buckeyes this year, only played half a season. Yeah.
Yep. They did get the traditional game in with Miami that ended at a 0-0 tie.
Riveting.
Yep. They waxed Xavier 12-0.
Nice.
Let's see. Ohio University, that was another tie, 6-6. The two games on the schedule that are a little mystifying is Fort Thomas.
Okay.
UC won 6-0. And as near as I can figure out, Fort Thomas was literally Fort Thomas, the military training camp in northern
Oh,
Kentucky. So UC was a military training camp.
yeah.
Fort Thomas was a military training camp. The military believed that these football games were part of the military training.
Yeah.
So you got the two soldiers teams together, and then we played a team from Georgetown, and I haven't figured out who from Georgetown came to Cincinnati to get beaten 21-0.
Ooh.
I don't think there was a military camp out there, and I don't believe there was a college out there. So I'm not sure what the deal was.
Just a bunch of neighboring kids that came
Yeah.
to.
So speaking of kids,
Well.
the schools are closed.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're going to find this hard to believe, but in 1918, there was no Zoom.
Yeah, you couldn't just jump on a Zoom call and.
That's right. No Zoom. Interestingly enough, looking at what the schools did, I came across a term that I had not seen since I was a child. And I'm not sure whether you have heard this. The term is correspondence school.
Okay. Now I've heard the word separately.
Yeah, correspondence school used to be a thing. It was a thing up until I was probably in high school, maybe after that. But the idea of a correspondence school is that you would use the mail. And so the teacher would send assignments out and reading material to the students, and the students would do the reading and do the assignments and then mail them back to the teacher, who would grade them and mail the grades back to the students. And so what was going on in Cincinnati, instead of Zoom, is you had the postal carriers, the mailmen, carrying the school lessons back and forth from the schools. And it was almost as efficient as Zoom. It was not instantaneous, but
Just a
time when mail was delivered 4 times a day.
Oh, okay.
In the cities,
Yeah.
you know, out in the country, it was less frequent. But in the cities, you could very easily write a postcard to somebody and drop it in the morning mail, and they'd have it by noon, and you'd get a response by that evening.
The same day. Wow, I did not know that. I was gonna say that's pretty similar to like a virtual online school, like, submit your document, upload it to Blackboard type of thing. But yeah, same day, 4 times. I mean, if you got the homework, did it super quick, and then sent it back, you could get the grade pretty soon. I guess it wouldn't take weeks.
See, so that's one thing that the schools were doing. The other thing that schools were doing, and remember, this is getting into winter. You know, we're in October, November. It's starting to get a little chilly around here. And it was what was it, 1917, when the Ohio River had frozen over.
Yeah.
So the environment was still pretty chilly here. They would hold classes outside, and they would build classrooms on the roof, outdoor classrooms on the roof of most schools, and the children would go up there and sit at desks on the roof, and there was no like a heater or anything, nothing to warm them, because the medical opinion at the time was that the colder the air was, the more healthful it was.
Oh, of course.
The more it made your lungs work to warm it up, the more healthful it was. And so the children who were taking classes outside would wear these full body coveralls that they called Eskimo suits. And when you see them in pictures, they look just like Eskimo suits.
Just to go to the roof to go to class. Yeah,
Exactly.
Children nowadays should not complain about anything if that's what happened a century ago.
Now, there's a remnant of that in Cincinnati. the public schools started the outdoor classroom movement, but a number of people who ran private schools decided that they were going to do this as well, especially because their clients, the rather wealthier people who could afford a private school, were
Mhm.
asking them to do this. You know, I'd like my children to get the same benefits of freezing to death while they're studying algebra as the poor kids. And so in Clifton, a lady named Mrs. Lot Speech, who had a private school that she called the Lot Speech School, started teaching classes out of doors. Now, the Lot Speech School itself is no longer in existence,
Mhm.
but when a number of private schools back in the 70s decided to merge and create Seven Hills School, one of them was the Lot Speech School. So
Oh
the Seven
wow.
Hills School
Okay.
continues this tradition. I don't think they have outdoor classes, but it's in their history, you know.
Yeah. On each of the 7 hills, they could hold classes.
Now here's a thing that creates a mystery for historians.
Hmm.
You know, I'm trying to find parallels between now and then. And of course, one of the big issues now is masks.
Yeah.
Are you going to wear a mask? Or is it going to infringe your freedom? You know, that whole debate about masks. And I thought there's got to be something like that going on back in 1918.
Right.
It's intriguing that I know people wore masks. The reason I know people wear masks is there are photographs preserved in the National Archives
Hmm.
of the United States of people in Cincinnati wearing masks.
Okay.
And in particular, there is a photo of two barbers in a barber shop wearing masks while they are taking care of customers, and it's in Cincinnati. And there's a photo of some soldiers either on their way to Chillicothe or on their way back from Chillicothe, but they're doing some shopping down on 4th Street, and both of
Hmm.
them are wearing masks. So there's photographic evidence that people wore masks in Cincinnati. There's not a mention of it in the newspapers.
Really?
Not not a peep. I found two items in the newspaper indicating something about masks. One was an advertisement for a medical supply company
Hmm.
that was offering hygienic masks for doctors and nurses. So they were not selling them, you know, for the general public. They specifically said in the ad for doctors and nurses. The second item that I found was a call from the Red Cross. The Red Cross wanted women from Cincinnati who knew how to sew to volunteer to make masks
Okay.
for the soldiers out at the army camp in Chillicothe. So not make masks so that we can give them to school kids, not make masks
Right.
so the public can have them, specifically for the military. And those were the only references that I was able to find in the newspaper. Now, you know, somebody with better search skills might turn up something, but I just found that really intriguing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, did we know that it was airborne? Like that? Like we had talked about. They had talked about that, and when that happened, but
They It's interesting, and that's a very pertinent question
hmm.
that unpacks um, what I've referred to as the variety 6-pack cans of worms,
Okay.
because what you just phrased is the intersection of the old medicine and the new medicine.
Ah.
So the new medicine knew about bacteria. And in fact, there's lots of writing in 1918 about why can't we find the bacteria that causes this disease? And of course, it was caused by a virus, and nobody could see a virus until electron microscopes were invented in the 1930s.
Ah,
So,
okay.
but they knew that there were diseases caused by bacteria, and the transmission was airborne. So they
Okay.
knew that. The old medicine, the old school medicine, and remember in 1918, there are doctors who practiced during the Civil War who were still practicing. They were very old, but they were still practicing.
Yeah.
And that school of medicine believed that diseases were caused by bad air. So not necessarily that there were microbes in the air, just bad air. And in fact, Italian for bad air is malaria.
Well, there you go.
Okay, so yes, whether they practice the new medicine or the old medicine, they believe that this was airborne and that a mask would protect you.
Yeah.
So that was what was at work there.
But no mask order, no big announcement.
The orders that came down
protection
from the city did not order people to wear masks.
Interesting.
There were no editorials saying, "Gosh, masks are uncomfortable," and yet there are all these photos that indicate that in fact, yeah, people were wearing masks.
Yeah.
The one big difference, very big difference, is in the numbers.
Okay.
Okay. Worldwide, and even in the United States, throughout the United States, the 1918 influenza killed many people. It is believed in Cincinnati in 1918, well, between October of 1918 and March of 1919, so about a 6-month period, it's believed in that 6-month period that perhaps 80,000 Cincinnatians contracted influenza, and that 2,263 died.
Wow. Okay, that's a high percentage.
There were more than 1,400 children, minors, who lost both parents.
Wow.
Now let's compare that to this year. So starting in March of this year and going through today, I looked up the figures today. Cincinnati recorded just over 16,000 cases of COVID. So that's not even a quarter of the influenza cases.
Yeah.
And since March has recorded 156 deaths. So the death toll is considerably lower, and it's a testament to new understandings of medicine that developed since 1918. You know, but even back then, they knew that these lockdowns worked because as soon as they released a lockdown, cases spiked.
Cases would spike back up. Yeah.
And that occurred in Cincinnati in 1918 twice. One was after about a month and a half of no school. They decided they had to send the kids back to school. One of the reasons they had to send the kids back to school is if they were at home, the parents had to stay home and they weren't working. They wanted to get the factories back up, and so they sent the kids back to school, and immediately went through the roof.
Cool.
The other spike occurred. The city had closed all the stores, and it decided to reopen them with the notice that the stores had to close at 4:30. the store owners objected and said, you know, you're hurting our business by cutting our hours, and by closing early, you're packing more people into the streetcars, because just like Cincinnatians did not have kitchens, they didn't have automobiles.
Oh, yeah.
And so to get around, you had to get on the streetcar. And so when they reopened the stores and the people did pack into the streetcars, boom,
Another spike back up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask about curfew and see how they what else how they handled it back then that was similar to today.
And it's apparently very much like today, in that compliance was really voluntary. I don't think I've run into a single story that indicated that police shut down a place. But perhaps one final note, one way to close this is with COVID, we're starting to hear that people recover from relatively mild cases, but then discover they have complications.
Yeah.
And so respiratory illness and kidney ailments and a variety of things are coming into play, even from people who thought they had a bad case of the sniffles. And the same thing happened in 1918. As we moved into 1919, the city had to open neighborhood respiratory centers, because even the people who lived through the influenza pandemic were developing tuberculosis, they were developing pneumonia, they were developing all sorts of respiratory problems, asthma, that they had not had before. And so that's another parallel.
Oh, wow. Wow. Very interesting. Think about how Cincinnati went through a pandemic a century ago. Now the parallels and medicine, and 2, 3, 4 generations later, now we are still dealing with something very similar.
Yeah. What's that old saying that history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes?
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say either that or we live in a simulation and it just caught the end and it's going to repeat every 100 years.
Well, there's another hypothesis.
There you go. It just changes a few things, so it's not.
That's right.
That's why it's repeating itself. That's great. That's great. All right. Thank you, Greg Hand, for coming on again and talking about pandemic back in the 1918 compared to today. If you want to continue to follow Greg Hand, he has his blog, Cincinnati Curiosities, and we will have you back on here.
Thank you.
Thank you.